Hello, everybody watching on the Onyx Path Twitch channel. We are currently awaiting for one more panelist. He may join us later, but for the time being, there's three of us here to discuss running your best role-playing game. On that note, we need to change the subtitle underneath this stream, Travis. But in the meantime, let's have a look at who's here with me. We've got LaTia Jacquise. Could you introduce yourself? Who are you and what are you about?
Hello, my name is LaTia Jacquise. I am a convention GM for primarily Dungeons & Dragons D&D Adventurers League, but I also run youth program games for children at a local game store, and I also dabble in the writing as well. So that is where I am. That is where my section of running your best RPG will be kind of coming from today.
Lovely. We also have Justin Achilli.
Howdy, my name is Justin Achilli. I am, that was my honk, by the way. I'm a game designer at Funcom, previously at Ubisoft Red Storm, previously at CCP, previously at White Wolf. I have been making commercial games for, 25 years. So I have kind of my finger in various pies of game production and game running at conventions.
We also have Eloy Lasanta with us.
Hey, everybody. I'm Eloy Lasanta from Third Eye Games and also New Agenda Publishing. And I've also not only run many games at many conventions, but I have also worked on a lot of different games. I don't only run my own games, I run other people's games and all kinds of stuff. So it's a lot of fun. I've been creating games for much shorter period than Justin.
I think we can all say that.
That's a circuitous way of calling me old. I appreciate that. Yeah. That's good.
Hey, we both have gray in our beard. It's all good.
And I have no hair at all. And I'm Matthew Dawkins. Some of you, well, most of you probably know me because you're on the Onyx Path Twitch, but those of you who don't, I am the current in-house World of Darkness developer over at Onyx Path. I also develop games like They Came From Beneath the Sea. I've been running and playing games since around the age of 17 or 18. And what we hope to do with this panel is largely through anecdote talk about the best ways to run your games. We aim to pitch at various audiences, running things all the way from running things for children through to running things at conventions and for your home group, along with handling different genres as well. And I think that's actually a good place to start. We will also be going to the audience for questions and answering them as and when. And just as I get to the start, one last thing in Columbo style, please, if you are not familiar yet, on onyxpathcon.com, there is a place where you can contribute money to charity. We've got two charities linked to this convention. We've got the Thurgood Marshall Fund. We have the Bodhana Group. They're two fantastic charities. And so far, we've raised just over $1,000 for them combined. But we would love to see that figure go up. Even if you can just donate $1, it is greatly appreciated from us. We also have discounts on a whole bunch of games that you can find on that website, onyxpathcon.com. Final thing, we will be doing a giveaway of an RPG by the end of this panel. So keep watching. We'll do a kind of a raffle of everyone who's in the chat, and someone will get a free game. So there you go. So yeah, back to the topic at hand. I thought the best place for us to start would probably be something that Onyx Path is quite well known for, and I'm sure all of us have dabbled in or spent an inordinate amount of time on, and that's horror. When running horror RPGs, of course, the genre itself comes with its own myriad of challenges, both from aspects of tone and taste and gauging your players', I guess, limits and interests. So I would like to actually start with LaTia, because you're primarily, I think you said, conventioneer.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, when running horror games at an RPG convention, I assume the challenge is greater than running for people you know. But
yes,
go ahead.
So I have not actually dabbled much in horror. I've run a couple of like, just kind of horror themed things. I think in a setting where you're sharing a space with potentially hundreds of other people, setting the tone is important. So making sure that you convey the proper tone of the thing that you are running to kind of immerse people, to kind of put that horror bubble around your table as it is. A particular module that I ran at a convention last year, because who went to a convention? What conventions are this year? Took place at a house, an abandoned house on, just in the middle of nowhere, and you are fighting off these hordes of undead. Like, they just keep coming and they just keep coming, and conveying that sense of overwhelm. And at the end of your tether, like, your players are like probably tapping out of spells and they're running out of resources, and really conveying that sense of like desperation before like the 11th hour is something that I find enjoyable and sometimes a little difficult.
I think that's an excellent idea. It's something I once participated in a Chronicles of Darkness game at a convention, and to simulate the survival horror nature of the game, there were empty bullet casings on the table, and those were our bullets. And every single time you fired a bullet, you had to hand one in, because a lot of players really engage with that kinesthetic side of things, having props and being able to physically see that representation of counting down your lives effectively. That was a really good way of managing suspense. But Justin, I mean, you've obviously worked with horror games, well, for most of your adult life. And how do you balance, I guess, how do you manage suspense for a gaming group, rather than, just out and out gore and revulsion?
Sure. Actually, I think LaTia's point here is a great one. Know kind of the tone of what you're going for. Are you running Castlevania or are you running Resident Evil, right? In a tabletop context, are you running Ravenloft or are you running Wraith? So knowing what you're trying to communicate to the players. Is your horror a theme? Is it actually a horror game? Or is it, more of an adventure game that has horror components to it? And being able to make that decision right out of the gate, like that's almost your first decision, whether you're running a convention one-shot or whether you're planning a giant chronicle, right? And so knowing what you're trying to, the emotional response you're trying to provoke in your players. In game design, this is kind of, there's an idea here that typical game design goes from mechanics, which is the rules and systems, through dynamics, which is the interplay of systems, and they ultimately create aesthetics, which is how the player experiences it. If you start by thinking about what the player is going to get, that's going to give you a lot better results than, oh, I've got this horror system, so I want to make the players roll 3 dice here, et cetera, et cetera. That said, once you know the aesthetic that you're trying to create, that system you described, Matthew, is perfect, right? Like, these are the finite number of bullets you can use for creating suspense, for creating a heightened thrill. One of the things that I like to do is have those limitations there. And so, for example, if instead of bullets, it's, heal spells or lives or something, and there are one fewer of them on the table than there are players, right? So you get into situations where you're having to need to decide, okay, get up and go again, we need to start thinking about how to use these. So once you know what you want the player to experience, you can use your rules to start building experiences from that.
I'd like to turn the question around slightly for you, Eloy, and focus on the characters people will be playing in these games, because a lot of horror games we see get run as, I guess, one-shot throwaway games, where, I mean, the Call of Cthulhu example is the famous one, where the traditional GM comes in, or keeper, I should say, comes in, runs Call of Cthulhu, and the end result is always death or madness. And I think my personal view is players have kind of moved on from that a little. So how do you get players to have a personal investment in their characters in a horror game?
Well, let me excuse me. I did want to just address the running at conventions versus running at home.
Please do.
Just ever so briefly. The thing about that is I actually find it easier at conventions as opposed to harder at conventions. Because for me, when you go to a convention, if they've signed up for a horror game, that buy-in is already there. Like, they are coming to be in a horror game, as opposed to sometimes you have to convince your friends who are just like, ha 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 ha, let's have fun and do whatever. Getting them to get into the right sense, it can be a little bit difficult. So I wanted to give my point of view on that real quick before I move on to the actual thing. So the updated question. I feel that it's always important to, look at every character as an actual person. And I think that is where some players kind of maybe don't, invest too much in their player, especially if it's like a horror type thing. They're like, I might die, so I'm not going to care too much. But if there's, integral parts of this character that actually are reflective of a person, it's not, well, this is your level 6 fighter and he has these spells. It's like, no, his name, is Eric and he comes from this land and his sister is in trouble. And like, that's basically where you get a lot of the investment is as the GM, especially how you frame things. And it requires a lot of descriptive, speaking. So it's not like you walk into a room and there's zombies, and you walk into a room, there's a man gnarled and he's hovered over another body, and what could he be doing? It's like that's what you need when you're running a horror game to get people invested. And I mean, and honestly, those tips work for any genre, but I think are almost mandatory for a successful horror game.
Well, we're going to switch gears slightly because we're getting some questions in the chat already.
Oh no!
And one.
Can you guys see me?
Yep.
Okay, because it's weird because I haven't used Google Meet before. I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, it's quite all right. It's new technology for all of us. It's a brave new world. We have a BLK Shroud in the chat asking, really looking forward to hearing your advice for an individual who has never run a Chronicle but wants to start one. So taking things back to, I guess, brass tacks of running games. Again, well, same order. LaTia, I know it's a very broad question, but what is your advice to a prospective GM, someone who's never run a game before but really wants to?
I would say before you even think about grabbing a bunch of people to, I'll scratch that, because sometimes the best ideas come from getting together with your friends and saying, hey, I want to run a game, but I've never done it. Especially if you're getting together with the people that you're intending to run the game for, what do you like in a game? Like, I think starting the foundation at building the story, like what kind of story do you want to tell as a GM? And what kind of story are your players, or what kind of story are your players interested in? Kind of helps. It's still super broad because you could have all of your friends could be interested in like 5 different genres of things. And then you're like, how am I going to fit all of that into a 1 or 2 shot? Or is this going to be something that ends up becoming a longer thing? But I think before you sit down and roll dice or whatever, you should figure out what you want to play, what kind of story, because that will inform what system you want to go to, for example. Start with that.
What do you think on the subject, Justin?
For me, I think one of the most important things to remember as you start planning your Chronicle is that the big difference between the entertainment media of games versus more traditionally consumed media is that games are interactive. And so your players are your co-creators. It's not you dictating the story at them. So focus on thinking about, the players are going to give me feedback. That being the case, don't script your Chronicle, don't plan your campaign. Instead, kind of create these flashpoints where decisions are going to be made. Think about here's a scenario that could happen. Here's a situation that will emerge, and don't plan that, the players will get from A to B and then they'll go from B to C. Instead, as a storyteller or as a GM, you're going to thrive. Your creativity is going to be stoked by the players responding to the situations that you propose to them. Don't have in mind, oh, when they kill the dragon, X, Y, or Z. Instead, like, there's a dragon, now what? And so that, I think, is one of the biggest things that is different and has evolved over time from my early work on Vampire through my modern work in games design is, acknowledge, I mean, there's even a sense of when you call someone the storyteller, that creates this image of everyone sits around and listens to the storyteller, right? That's not true. They are more of a, here's this, what do you do kind of relationship between the GM or the storyteller and the players. So, create opportunities for action for the players as opposed to dictating a plot. It's not a movie. There's interaction involved. Let the player do it.
And Eloy, I know obviously we're covering a lot of ground, so I won't constantly keep you as the third person because you'll have the hardest information to come up with.
I love it.
All right, I will. So what do you think? So yeah, let's put a scenario in front of you.
Okay.
You've got someone who comes to you and they bought one of your games. Why not? And feel free to self-promote. Which game did they buy?
Well, if they're a first-time, GM, I always push the PIP system. That's actually the system that I designed for play with kids or first-time GMs. It's designed specifically for that. It's a simple system, but also has a lot of crunch to it. And the way that all of the adventures are lined up are description for the players, and then here's how you run this as the GM. And it's written in such a way that a kid could literally pick it up and just run it from the book. And for me, that was important when I was doing that. So I always, if you're very first time thing, I mean, unless you're into ninjas and demons and stuff like that, I'd be like, well, just take the PIP system core book because then you can run whatever you want from it. But that's the easiest thing. So first off, if you're a first time GM, buy the PIP system. But other things that you can do, and because it has a lot of tips and stuff in it, but just to kind of relay, I never had the option of not being a GM. When I first started gaming, we were in a roundtable group, which meant every week it would turn off, and eventually it would get to you, and you had to run something because everybody wanted to play. So when it got to mine, I remember I spent hours on this really amazing adventure. And they were like, yeah, I use this spell, I defeat your thing, blah, blah, blah. And it was over in an hour, and I was like, oh, well, I don't have anything else after that. They're like, cool, one of the other guys will pick up. But that was a good first try, man. It's good. Next time it'll be better. So that's really the main thing is your first few, campaigns or whatever, they might crash and burn in the worst way. But that doesn't mean that you're bad at it or that you might not one day be on a panel talking about how to GM games. So,
in fact, you will fail, right? You're going to make mistakes. It's a learning process, right? So just embrace it. The rules are not as important. You're going to get everybody does. Everybody does. The rules you'll get the hang of. It's more the craft that you're looking to cultivate. Yeah.
I've always said that, GMing is like a muscle. And so the more you work that muscle out, the stronger you become. So, if it's your first time, don't go pick up, the 500 pounds, go for the 50 pounds and you'll probably be okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way of putting it, a good metaphor, because I remember when I first started GMing, I would, of course, write essay-length stories. I would write out every single monster's stat block. I'd write out dialogue that I could read to the players. And this, it's to some people that seems laughable. To some people it feels like, yeah, that's of course what you do. And I got to a point where I was running a very long game of Pathfinder, actually, and we came to a point where the adventurers were on a plateau surrounded by 5 towers, and they just finished one of the towers and they were due to go into the second one, and I had only written up the second tower. I had put lots of wards and monsters in the way of them going into the other three. But of course, players being players, they decided to go for one of the other ones. And I didn't want to throw up too many arbitrary obstacles in their path to prevent them from getting what they wanted. And so they went into this tower I hadn't designed at all. And I found it was like, oh, I can lift that weight now, because I could improvise an entire dungeon. I could improvise the puzzles, the monsters, the NPC interactions. I could just do it because I've been doing it for so long by that point. And I think that is something that almost all GMs get to a point where improvisation becomes second nature. But you do need a lot of build up to get there. You need the practice for confidence, if nothing else.
I think there's a point there too that one of the valuable skills for a GM or storyteller to have is know when to not talk, because your players will gleefully dig themselves a hole and do your work for you. And then all you have to do is adjudicate, oh, okay, you really put your foot in it. Now what, right? They've given you the next point of interaction. So
yeah, and sometimes they'll come up with a better solution to the murder mystery than the one you came up with. It's if they're on an adventure and they realize, oh, the big bad guy was this person all along, there's no point arguing with them. They've come to this conclusion and they're generally happy about it. So yeah, reward them for their ingenuity and adapt. Or you say, okay, that's a good place to call it, and go away for a week, think about how you're going to pick those threads up the week after. Something we touched on was running games for kids. And obviously that's a very different audience to the majority of people we bump into at conventions and our home games. But I know for a fact, I think all three of you run for kids. In fact, I know, Justin, I have seen your social media posts where you sometimes talk about the games you've been running. And so obviously there's going to be some things such as content that isn't included in games for children. But I'd like to ask, going back to you, LaTia, not necessarily the tone, but how do you manage things like rules, mechanics, and failure? I think failure is an interesting thing because speaking to my son, I don't think he could quite grasp the idea of failing is a good thing quite yet.
Mm-hmm. So fortunately, the kids that I run from, yes,
sometimes, yeah, sometimes.
The kids that I run for, so our program ranges from 8 to 17, so I get the whole gamut of emotions and experiences. They love to fail. They think it's hilarious. Running for kids, you become good at improv very quickly, because they are placing, like in any game, your players are kind of placing the tracks, even though you have a couple of tracks here and there. But if the kids want to go do a thing, they will find a way to go do the thing, despite what the story says they should be doing. And not to say that you should railroad them into keeping with the story, but kids are excited to see the results of their dice rolls, whether it be a massive success or a complete and total failure. And you do get the occasional kid that is like, I'm going to try again, and I'm going to try again, and I'm going to try again. And you have to create a situation where trying again isn't so much impossible, but to get them to understand that you are not capable of doing this thing right now, but maybe one of your friends can help you, or maybe you can come back to it. But right now you're tiring yourself out, or you're breaking your thieves' tools, or, creating not an insurmountable obstacle, but just letting them know you can come back to it. It's not the end of the world if you can't do the thing right now.
And that's a fantastic learning tool all on its own. But yeah, to deliver that through RPGs is fantastic. So what about you, Eloy? What's your when you run for children? Is that your own? Do you have how do you usually deliver this kind of game?
Well, I ran for my kids when they were younger, It's been quite a few years since that's happened. But I run at conventions all the time, so I run for kids at conventions. But being a parent of three, I don't know, it running for kids. I know people are like, "Oh, you're gonna go into the lion's den," but I'm just like, "All right, everybody, sit down. We're gonna do this thing, and we're gonna be good." And they usually will listen. Like most kids, there's always the problem kid. But for the most part, I would say running for kids, I think the biggest thing is don't assume that they're dumber than adults. That's a pretty big thing for me. I run adventures that I run it exactly the same as I would for adults as I would for kids. And you can see that they are making completely different decisions in either group. The kids are much more usually about, oh, well, I mean, but why are they attacking us? Is there a way that I can make them our friends instead? And I'll be like, yeah, you can totally try that. Go for it.
Every kid wants a pet dragon.
Exactly.
They will any sort of pet, they will immediately try to befriend it before they decide to do away with it.
Which is why you need to include a pet mechanic in any kid's game. It's a thing. But what I would say the biggest thing for me would be when you do get those instances where maybe that kid wasn't ready for the result of something. I've had like a kid burst out into tears at my table before. And we have to be like, all right, pausing the game. Hey, are you okay? What happened? It was, I believe they were going after Phoenix Feathers, and he actually rolled really, really well. And I was like, it was awesome. You actually got the feather and you made the rest of them run away because now you can get the feather and you can win. And I was like, I was trying to make it big for this kid. I was like, you rolled so well. This is amazing. You're obviously going to win this contest between you and all your friends to get the feather first. And he actually was crying and he was just like, but I want everybody to get a feather. And I'm like, okay, all right. Well, you know what? You scared most of them away, but now there's definitely enough now everybody can still get a feather. You're good, man. But guess what? You get a head start back to the finish line and you can do that. So like you do, there's a little bit more, handle with care when there's kids, because just like any gamer, and I think that you said it pretty well earlier, was like they really want to know what the result is going to be. So that anticipation of that result, if it doesn't match up, if the reality doesn't match up with what they were thinking was going to happen, can sometimes be a stark kind of, thing. So, but yeah, I mean, but I love running for kids. Honestly, they're some of the funnest, players to have, because as an adult, my brain doesn't work like theirs. So, so I'll be like describing something and they'll be like, what about, remember 2 scenes back when you described that? Can I go get that thing and use that here? I'm like, yeah, you could. Yeah, of course you could do it. I would have never thought of that because that's a kid.
That's excellent. What about you, Justin? What insights do you have for running for children?
I think one of the valuable things for running with children is also valuable for running with new players and kind of bringing new players into the game. Push the choice to the forefront. A lot of time with expert players or more veteran players, you can just describe the scene and they will proactively take action. But a lot of times for kids and for new players, they don't know kind of the boundaries of the play space. So if your description concludes with, do you do this or do you do this? And eventually you can kind of pull them into being more proactive, but letting them kind of, or setting the scene for them and giving them the context for the decisions they're making lets them know, okay, it's your turn to interact here. For my part, going back to something that Eloy said was always have a pet mechanic, right? In playing with my daughter Madeline, she's 12 now. But when she was younger, she would always choose the character, she would be a druid because it has a pet with it. And one of the things that she would do is if the pet took damage, she would use her healing spells to heal the pet, right? Because she didn't like the idea that her animal was hurt. And of course, if you're, playing in a purely tactical mindset, that's a terrible thing to do because manage your spells and resource consumption, blah, 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 blah. But, for what we were doing, that was entirely what she wanted to do. So, of course, yes, you can heal your, she had either a leopard or a cheetah, and the cheetah gratefully licks your hand as you restore it to full health, blah, 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 blah. Show them the outcomes of their actions. Definitely seeing the results of what they're doing Again, that's the difference between interactive media. I do this, and it creates this result, as opposed to, I just read what happens next, or I watch what happens next. So, kind of push them into the choices. Eventually, they will ultimately make their own choices, and show them the value of the outcomes of their decisions.
Something I did for a little while, I was running games at schools a few years back, just as a sort of drop-in after-school thing. And I was trying to find ways to engage the children. These were, I guess, young teenagers, 11, 12, 13, and keep them involved in the character they were playing and the plot. And one thing I did, to be honest, I do the exact same thing for adults. So the recurring theme is, don't talk down to the children, was get them to design their character's nemesis. Get them to design their character's foe, basically. The reason characters like Spider-Man are so damn popular is because of the Rogues Gallery. The fact you want to see them clash with this person over and over again. And it automatically gave them investment in the world around them, because then they could anticipate the kinds of things that their big bad guy was going to do. And we were playing superhero role-playing games, so it very much had that feel, but you can easily apply that sort of thing to any other genre, I think. So we've actually been getting lots of questions in the chat, and before I get to them, as we've just passed the halfway mark again, I'm going to point people watching to onyxpathcon.com, because we do have a charitable donation button on there, and we would love it if you could donate as little as $1 would be amazing to either of the two charities we've got, and lots of discounts. But beyond that, we've got a couple of questions about pacing in RPGs, and I would say pacing is one of the harder things to get right, especially when considering one-shots at conventions, because you want to wrap everything up with a lovely little bow. So I'm actually going to go to Justin first this time and ask, how do you manage pacing? Do you have any tips or tricks to, I guess, keeping people engaged, but also keeping that level of threat, maybe?
This is really hard. This is one of the hardest things you will do as a storyteller, because it's a difficult thing to craft in the first place, but also each player has a different threshold at which they respond to things. And one of the ways I like to think of it is, if you've ever seen some of the, I've only seen the first two, I think, of the Nolan Batman movies, but when the Batmobile comes out and into the street, there's this sound that emits from the Batmobile, and it sounds like, and it sounds like it is infinitely scaling up. And that's a weird trick called the shepherd tone in sound design, where it's not actually infinitely increasing. It's just a series of limited increases that kind of overlap, so you always think they're increasing. Do something like that. Overlap your encounters, or overlap your decision points, so that they're going to affect what's next down the road. So if you have a conflict, right, we're the vampires and we're on the dock, and here come the bad guys. They've got our ghoul, and they've captured our ghoul, and we're trying to get the ghoul back. Someone is there from the next encounter or decision point who's helping you ratchet up that tension. So even though you're not, the scale of the decision isn't necessarily getting larger every time, you feel that there's a steady sense of progression through the tension in the game's conflict. So you feel like, back 2 sessions ago when we decided to stake that guy and keep him, as opposed to throwing him out in the sun and burning him to ash, well, now he came back to haunt us. Oh, son of a bitch. And so all of a sudden that feels like a momentous decision, and one that has legacies, one that has consequences. So always give the shadow of the future, always call back to decisions that were made prior.
So what about you, Eloy? Let's say you've got a lengthy campaign on the go. So yeah, talking about campaigns maybe lasting even months. How do you maintain pacing in something like that?
I mean, pacing is always a weird thing, and I'm terrible at conventions. If you come and play in one of my games, because I run it like it's a home game. So sometimes we don't finish the thing. I'll be like, oh, time's up. You want to know what happened after everything? So that's just how it works sometimes. But honestly, when you have, a lot of pacing, I do kind of what, Justin said at the beginning. You have kind of some major plot points that you want to have occur. But a lot of the time, my pacing is like what I always say is I say go where the fun is. So if my next plot point is that this thing is supposed to happen, but they're like, yeah, you know what? We really want to spend this whole, session in a bar, trying to, talk to people and get information. And I'll be like, well, that wasn't the next thing on my list, but that's where you guys want to go and have fun. So pacing, I think pacing is a fallacy. So because pacing, like I as the GM, I am going to pace my story to fit you guys. Whereas kind of like what we've been saying this whole time, it's a collaborative thing. So yeah, I might have some stuff that might happen, but we might not get to that for a few sessions. Like if you guys are totally happy doing this over here, and funny enough, I ran one of my games, Part-Time Gods, at Gen Con, the last time I was at Gen Con, and 4-hour slot. We were about 2.5 hours in, and I was like, hey guys, we're gonna take a quick bio break, but I want to let you know I haven't touched the adventure yet. So do you want me to start doing anything with the adventure, or are you guys just cool doing what you guys are doing? And they were like, if you wanna, it's fine. I'm like, no, we'll just keep going. I just wanted to let you guys know that you were creating all of this. I did not bring any of this with me. So, because I'm there to facilitate fun, not only for the players, but for myself. And, seeing, as the designer, seeing them engage with the system and the setting so much that my adventure did not matter was thoroughly enjoyable for me, obviously. So anyway, yeah, I yield my time.
No, I just to echo that, I ran Horror on the Orient Express, to go back to Call of Cthulhu, a mega campaign by Chaosium. And the first time I ran it, the group of investigators decided they liked Paris so much that we ended up playing there for about 4 or 5 months worth of game time. So the train just left. The train was halfway across Europe by the time they connected with it. But they were interacting with mime cultists and all kinds of lovely French aspects. And yeah, we just delved into Parisian cults. They couldn't give a toss about the Sedefkar simulacrum. But let's hear. So before we wrap up on pacing, it's a slightly different stance for you. I would like, again, to speak about that convention play, beyond what Eloy has said. Again, that idea of trying to wrap a story up, because some people do sign up to games because they want a complete tale. Not all players have the agency, I guess, or feel like they have the agency to make the plot their own. So how do you manage something like that?
It's an interesting thing for me, because the nature of the games that I run at conventions, Adventurers League is meant to be played in the amount of time that the module is said, because if you don't finish it, you don't get the rewards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, part of it is, if my players are more than willing to forego that, as everyone else has said, it's totally fine. We'll continue to play in this abandoned shopping mall full of Modrons and Warforged. This is fine. One of the things that I like to do, if the characters are particularly inventive with their role play, they're just kind of riffing for a bit, I like to, like, not in a rude sort of way, but if they're kind of going on a little bit longer and the next plot point needs to happen soon, I just make it happen. Like, I just bring it up. Like, they're sitting in the abandoned food court and they needed to have been looking for, this, safe or whatever. I'm going to bring that up. Someone is going to passively perceive it, or a noise from that area is going to bring their attention to that area. And then I'll say, hey, remember you were supposed to be doing this thing. We can keep doing this, but there's a thing over there. But like Justin and Eloy have said, pacing is so tricky. It's so hard.
I've got a couple of quick fire questions, I think. Before we get on to them, as mentioned at the very start of this panel, we do have a giveaway of an RPG PDF for the people who are involved in the chat. So if you are interested in participating in that, please just comment with a hi, how are you, or contribute to the charity onyxpathcon.com. And Travis, who is in the background producing, will pick out a winner while all this is going on. So on to quick fire questions from Argology. And so looking for some quick fire answers if you can provide them. Starting with LaTia. Argology's question: for those of us scared of running a game, what are ways to build up our game running abilities outside of just running games?
Oh gosh. My
I
answer
know
to
it's not necessarily a quick fire question, but if
yeah.
you come up with any short answers, that would be wonderful.
Just do it. I don't know. Seek out GM tip videos. Look into there are so many helpful series of how to run games without actually running games. You can watch people for advice and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the thing. Videos, YouTube, and everything like that. There is very little you can't learn how to do on YouTube now, from changing the wheel on a car to running an RPG. It's all on there, so definitely use that. What about you, Eloy? Any advice?
I actually have a video on my YouTube channel about how to run games at conventions, and it's like 15 minutes long because I break everything down that I do. So that's an easy one to do. But honestly, if you're really just nervous about running a game, what I would say would be maybe ask one of your friends who is normally a GM to kind of co-GM or be kind of your rules person so that you can focus on the story that you want to tell and maybe be like, okay, cool. So now you get to this. What kind of role would they make for that real quick? Okay, so it's that kind of role. All right, make that kind of role. And then you basically have someone else there to kind of lean on when you are uncertain. But what you'll find is that the moment you ask somebody for help, you no longer, like, you become more confident because they're there. And it's kind of like when you're in school and you're like, you can't figure out the problem. So you go, teacher, can you come and help me? Oh, I just got it. It's cool. I actually just figured it out. So it's like, it's that sort of thing.
And Justin?
Kind of a almost orthogonal suggestion here, but shoot the shit with people. If you are planning a vacation, talk to a person at the hotel front desk and get a sense of back and forth. When once social distancing and quarantine ends, when you go to a bar, when you talk to the bartender, talk to them beyond just ordering a drink, get a back and forth there, get a sense of, I give you this, you give me that, and I respond. And, get a sense of the kind of interpersonal back and forth. It doesn't have to be transactional. In fact, it should not be transactional. You're not trying to trick them into giving you something or anything like that. But just get a sense for the cadence at which conversation happens, because 95% of gameplay is you talking to the other people. That remaining 5% is, rolling dice or moving chits and things like that. But once you get a good understanding of the back and forth between people, that's going to give you so much of the meat of the game that the systems will fall into place around it. Yeah,
and to add to that, similar vein, one of the ways I built my own confidence up was with a YouTube channel. I was a very nervous speaker, and my voice has changed dramatically over the last 15 years as a result of doing YouTube videos and then GMing lots of games. I've just become more confident, a faster talker. So the old acting trick of speaking to yourself in the mirror, if you're not quite ready to go to the bar, then it's not a sign of madness to talk to yourself, to rehearse, essentially. And the good old-fashioned one of read the book. And that may sound like teaching someone to suck eggs, but honestly, one of the best ways to build up confidence to run a game is to be familiar with its ins and outs. Now, not everyone is going to memorize every single rule in the game, and that's absolutely fine. But you can do things just like you would when you're studying and annotate, leave sticky tabs on pages where you're going to constantly reference, things like that, and pick out the part of the game you want to focus on. You don't need to run a World of Darkness game that involves vampires, werewolves, mages, wraiths, changelings, and everything else. You don't even have to have it involve the Camarilla, the Sabbat, and the Anarchs. You can have it in a just set on one block. And as soon as you start focusing on a tiny area of a game, your confidence grows because you don't need to worry about the wider world. So we have another question from C. Kane Live, might be Citizen Kane Live. How do you deal with indecisive players at your table, players who are reluctant to take action? So spinning back round to you, Justin, indecisive players, how do you tackle them? Other than, sort of...
Two quick fires here, right? The first of which is, number one, maybe they don't want to participate. Maybe their social interaction is literally, I just want to hang out with friends, right? You don't force them into the limelight. If they don't want to make a decision, okay, improvise, move the decision to somebody else. The second kind of quick fire response there is to kind of prod them, provoke them, kind of like what I was suggesting earlier. Give them a choice A or B, and then give them a choice A, B, or C. And eventually, once they become more comfortable in the decision-making environment, they will make their own decisions.
And LaTia?
Create a situation in that moment that kind of similar to what Justin said, that kind of forces them to interact. If you're in the middle of a combat and they don't know what they want to do, the enemy is going to go for them. It may not be complete, it may not be brutal, but the enemy is going to go for them, forcing them to make a reaction one way or another. If they choose not to react, then that's on them, but you have made that attempt to bring them into the situation.
That's a great idea. And then they can kind of riposte in reply, right? They get to use the system anyway.
Exactly.
And what about you, Eloy?
What I do whenever I'm trying to run a game is I do tailor it to the characters. So even if there's a player who is possibly reluctant, I'll say something like, we're in a situation where a light spell would be the most beneficial thing. I only wish that somebody here had a light. Oh, you do? Oh, isn't that interesting? And it's funny that I knew that already. Go ahead and use your light spell. So it becomes that sort of thing. Because I have a way of being pretty snarky when I'm GMing, but like in the nice way, in a fun way. But I treat everybody with kid gloves and sensitive and everything. But at the same time, we are all responsible for each other's fun. So if somebody is there and they're not engaging, I, as the GM, feel like it's my fault that they're not having fun for some reason, and that's why they're not engaging. So I will usually go out of my way to find ways to have people engage in my games. So yes, and it might be the situation. Sometimes I've had it at con games where the person might just be like, "No, I'm good. I'm good," and I'll be like, "Cool, we'll move on," because sometimes they don't really want to be super engaged, but a lot of the time it is just nervousness, especially when you're dealing with newer players. And a lot of the time I will create situations for each character to shine in a said session or adventure. And especially with those new players, that's a huge deal, because they'll be like, I'm sorry, this is supposed to be quick answers. But like I had I had a new player who was playing the Goddess of Orphans in my Part-Time Gods game. And they were like running around and doing all this crazy stuff. And I threw like this really bad character, this really big bad character who was the Goddess of Papers. But she was like a 10-year-old girl. And she was like thrashing the whole group. And then the character who was playing the Goddess of Orphans said, "Wait a minute, is she an orphan?" And I said, "Yes, she is." And she, oh, and then like she just like took mental control over the bad guy and just like shut it down. And then like that player I still get emails from that player who had never played in a game before that one. And now she like goes out and she's running games and she goes great because she got it in that moment. She was just like, this is a vessel for us to have fun and engage and not just be a passive player. So, but by creating the bad guy as a kid, I actually created that opening for whoever was playing the Goddess of Orphans to do that. So
one thing I'll add is it's not up to the GM necessarily to break people out of their comfort zones. If indeed some players like to play the fighter, some players like to play the wizard, and that means, and especially the case at conventions, if you get assigned a character that doesn't gel with you, sometimes the player has that sense of obligation. Well, I've got to sit here. I've paid my money now. I'm just going to play this character I don't enjoy, or I'm just going to sit here. And like Justin said at the very beginning of this segment, if you get a break, you can check with these people, your players. Are you enjoying it, or do you want to play this character? What can we change up? So it's certainly no harm done if a player wants to stick to type. If that's what they enjoy, brilliant, because that shouldn't disrupt the enjoyment of anyone else. Okay, so not much time left, and so we do have...
Sorry, that's my fault.
No, we've got lots of questions, and I'm going to choose one that's quite broad, but hopefully everyone's got a slightly different piece of advice on. And that's how to set mood and ambience. So going back to that horror question at the beginning, but let's speak about it more broadly. How to set mood and ambience at the table. Going to you, Eloy. What are the best ways you can think of in the time we have remaining?
Setting ambiance is, I'm slightly different. I'm not a huge user of props and music and stuff like that. Usually, I set the tone by making sure that everybody's attention is on me. And you can do a lot of things without props, without lighting, without music. You can adjust the way that you're speaking. If you speak slowly, it seems like what you're saying is more important. Even if it's not, it seems like it is. I am definitely not an accent person, so but you can even just do things like change your posture, whenever you're speaking as different characters. There's a lot of things that you can do, even if you are limited in your performance abilities like I am. So that's just one thing. That's my quick fire answer, because I'm not going to keep going. I'm going to move that on to the next person.
What about you, LaTia?
Descriptions. Descriptions do very well at setting the tone of your game. If you're, if it's horror themed or gothic horror themed, you mentioned, how, badly, I've just lost the word, but how disheveled a room looks, or, how, ancient the battlements of this castle look, properly conveying what a thing looks like, or what a room looks like, or what the players are experiencing goes a long way for setting tone, especially in a place where you may not be able to use music or lighting to convey that.
It's something Fudge and Fates, of course, did very well with the idea of tagging scenery. If you are good enough at describing a place, and that is where preparation in advance can really help you, you can then say to the players, remember, you can interact with any of this. And it's one of those wonderful game mechanics that when it was introduced in those games, there was a light bulb moment where everyone thought, why weren't we doing this before? So, Justin, to wrap up, how do you set mood and ambience?
When the session opens, hit a set piece hard. In a horror environment, there's the castle on the crag, the lightning is behind it. Okay, we know what we're getting into, right? As Star Wars opens, here's the rebel ship that is slowly swallowed by the giant Star Destroyer, right? You're dealing with an imbalance of power here. Hit that initial setting component hard, and it doesn't even have to be visual. For something like Vampire, okay, you wake up, you're starving. There's a moisture to the air. There's a smell of blood. Now what? Once you've got that initial prompt for action there, everything will carry from there.
And that goes back to something I said earlier with the description part, right? It's like, you wake up, you feel hungry, you have the taste of something in the air, not you wake up, you're a vampire, go. So there is something to that. That
olfactory side of things is key, I think, to so many experiences, because everyone, or almost everyone, can relate to the taste of something, the smell of something, more so than sometimes just the visual. Yeah. Keep it in mind. I think everyone at some point has tasted blood, and they may not like it, but everyone's tasted it. So It's one of those places you can go up and down from. Anyway, we have come to the end of our panel. We could probably go on for another hour, but I do have another panel in 15 minutes. And I'm so grateful to all of our panelists and all of our viewers. I will say, I don't know if you noticed, Travis, who is producing this, Eloy has volunteered to raffle one of his games as well. So feel free to randomly choose one of the people from the chat who's been interacting, and we will hook them up with a PDF from Eloy's company too, Third Eye Games. And thank you very much, LaTia. Thank you very much, Eloy. Thank you very much, Justin. Greatly appreciated. And thank you very much, everyone watching. Please go on onyxpathcom.com and contribute to our charities. I want to see that bar going up to 100% before the end of day 2. That will be wonderful. Again, $1, $10, $100. It's all appreciated. The Bahana Group use RPGs for therapy, and we've got the Thurgood Marshall College Trust Fund as well. I think we've got 2 wonderful charities involved, and I would really love to see them both hit their targets. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Travis, you can sign us off.
Bye,
Everyone
everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Well,